It was a quiet night in Los Angeles, the kind where the soft drizzle of rain hits the windows, and the world outside feels still. But inside the apartment of Daniel Hayes, a 32-year-old high school teacher, everything was about to shatter. The night began like any other, but by morning, his life would be changed forever. It started with a call that would haunt the police for years to come. On October 15, 2023, neighbors heard strange noises coming from Daniel's apartment in the Hollywood Hills. The sounds of things being thrown, and the unsettling silence that followed, triggered a distress call. When the officers arrived, they found the unthinkable: Daniel's lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor in a pool of his own blood. The door was locked, the windows shut tight, but there was one thing that sent chills down the detectives' spines: the apartment was filled with hidden cameras, all recording the tragic scene. At first glance, the crime seemed senseless, but the more the investigators dug, the darker the story grew. The primary suspect, Sophia Turner, Daniel's girlfriend of 2 years. The police quickly turned their attention to her. But why would someone so seemingly loving, so intelligent, commit such a heinous act? What could drive a woman to murder the person she claimed to love? Sophia had always been charming. A software engineer with a brilliant mind, she seemed perfect. But as the investigation unraveled, the cracks in her perfect image began to show. Born in Portland, Oregon, Sophia grew up in a family that was anything but perfect. Her mother, distant and cold, offered little emotional support, and her father was absent, both physically and emotionally. From a young age, Sophia craved validation and love, yet struggled to form lasting connections. Her childhood friends recall a possessiveness that made them uncomfortable. If they spent time with others, Sophia would retreat, her behavior fluctuating between anger and deep sadness. But it wasn't just friendships that she suffocated. As she got older, Sophia's need for control expanded into her relationships. One ex-boyfriend recalled how she would flood his phone with messages if he didn't reply quickly enough. When he set boundaries, she grew manipulative. He thought it was just her caring too much, but in reality, it was the beginning of a pattern. Sophia excelled academically, always a step ahead of everyone around her. She graduated as valedictorian and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. There, her obsession with control took on a new form: technology. Sophia quickly became fascinated with coding and surveillance software, using her technical expertise to monitor her classmates and even strangers. Her roommate, Sarah, once mentioned that Sophia knew things about people that no one could know unless they had been watching. But after Stanford, things only worsened. Sophia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup in Silicon Valley, but her personal life was a mess. She had short, intense relationships that ended badly. One ex-boyfriend described his time with Sophia as suffocating. He was constantly monitored, his every move scrutinized. She would show up unannounced, accuse him of things he hadn't done, and demand endless reassurance. But despite her destructive tendencies, Sophia couldn't help herself. She convinced herself that if she could just control the relationship enough, she could make her insecurities disappear. She didn't realize how far she was pushing, until it was too late. In early 2020, Sophia moved back to Los Angeles, accepting a remote position with her company. It was here, in the sprawling city of opportunity, that she met Daniel. Their meeting was ordinary enough, at a local farmer's market on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Daniel, a friendly, easygoing man with a passion for literature, was there picking up fresh produce for the week. Sophia, instantly drawn to his warm smile and easy conversation, lingered longer than she intended. They bonded over a shared love of books and the outdoors, and a few weeks later, their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak. Daniel was smitten. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Sophia was, and how easy it was to talk to her. At first, everything seemed perfect. Their relationship blossomed quickly. They spent long evenings together, exploring Los Angeles, discussing literature, and hiking through the mountains. Daniel's friends and family thought they made the perfect couple. But there were signs, subtle at first, that all was not well. Sophia's constant need for Daniel's attention became more apparent. Daniel's sister, Rachel, noticed that whenever they spent time together, Sophia was always there, constantly calling or texting him. If he attended family events without her, she would become upset. Daniel brushed it off at first, thinking it was just excitement in the early days of a relationship. But as time passed, the red flags grew. By fall of 2020, Sophia had essentially moved into Daniel's apartment, even though he had never officially asked her to. She started dictating what he could and couldn't do, even down to what he ate and how he spent his free time. At work, Daniel began to decline invitations from friends and colleagues to go out after work, something he had always enjoyed. When his friend Jim noticed these changes and asked him about it, Daniel said Sophia wasn't comfortable with him going out late. But his colleagues, who had once seen him as outgoing and fun, now saw him becoming more distant, more isolated. Sophia's control expanded further, even taking over Daniel's social media accounts. His usual Facebook and Instagram posts became sparse, impersonal. When questioned, Daniel would explain that he was just trying to be more private online. But the truth was much darker. It wasn't privacy he craved, it was control. By Christmas of 2020, things had gotten worse. Daniel was now nearly completely cut off from his friends and family, isolated by the very woman who claimed to love him. He didn't even notice it happening. Sophia's behavior escalated as 2021 approached. She began accusing Daniel of infidelity without any evidence, even showing up uninvited to his workplace, claiming to drop off lunch, but in reality, she was scanning the room for signs of disloyalty. Daniel's friend Jim remembered a disturbing moment on a camping trip. The night before they were supposed to leave, Daniel called to cancel, his voice defeated. Sophia had become upset that he was going without her, even though she had declined the invitation. By the time Daniel returned from a teaching conference in late August 2021, Sophia had gone to extreme lengths. While he was away, she installed hidden cameras throughout his apartment, disguised as everyday objects like a smoke detector, a phone charger, and even a potted plant. She used her technical expertise to access the feeds remotely, watching his every move. What began as suspicion in her mind became an obsession. Even when Daniel went about his daily routines without any cause for concern, Sophia's paranoia grew. She started obsessing over the smallest details, why Daniel smiled at a text message or who he was waiting for at the window. Daniel was completely unaware of the cameras, but he started to feel an increasing sense of unease in his own home. Things felt off, his books were slightly out of place, his toiletries moved. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. When he discovered the truth, it was a discovery that would change everything. As Daniel stood in his living room one night, picking up a broken plant pot, his heart raced as his eyes caught a glimpse of something small and metallic hidden among the soil. A tiny camera lens, barely the size of a pencil eraser, stared back at him. This was just the beginning. Over the next hour, he found 5 more hidden cameras around his apartment. Every moment he thought was private, every conversation he thought was his own, had been watched. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted, had invaded his privacy in the most intimate way possible. Shaking with anger and disbelief, Daniel immediately called Rachel, his sister. She answered on the second ring, her voice filled with concern. "Daniel, what's wrong?" she asked. His voice cracked as he explained what he had found, the horrors of being watched in his own home. Rachel was stunned, but she didn't hesitate. "You need to get out of there. Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Daniel didn't know if he could go through with it. Could he face Olivia, confront the woman he had shared so many moments with, knowing what she had done? Rachel's voice was calm and steady, urging him on, and finally, Daniel made the decision. The next day, he confronted Sophia, and everything changed. But what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. It was a moment that would forever change both their lives. Sophia Turner's life hadn't always been as perfect as it seemed when she met Daniel Hayes. While she appeared to have it all, intelligence, a successful career, and a charming personality, there was much more lurking beneath the surface. The layers of her carefully constructed image were about to peel away, revealing a troubled past that would explain her actions in the present. Sophia had been born and raised in a small suburban town outside of Portland, Oregon. From an early age, her parents, Margaret and James Turner, seemed to expect great things from her. Sophia was smart, brilliant even, and she excelled in school, always at the top of her class. But, despite her academic success, there was something missing: love. Her parents were distant, emotionally unavailable, and largely uninvolved in her personal life. Margaret, her mother, was cold, often preoccupied with her own affairs and showing little affection for her daughter. James, her father, was absent, physically and emotionally. He was often working long hours, and when he was home, he didn't seem to notice Sophia's yearning for attention. Sophia's classmates and childhood friends remember her as someone who tried hard to fit in but never truly succeeded. She couldn't form lasting friendships, and when she did, they were often strained by her possessiveness. Sophia wasn't the type to share her friends. If anyone she was close to spent time with someone else, she would pull away, growing quiet and withdrawn. Her behavior made others uncomfortable, but no one could quite put their finger on why. For Sophia, friendship was about control, not connection. She wanted to be the center of attention, and when she wasn't, she felt abandoned and angry. As she grew older, her need for control didn't subside, it only grew stronger. In high school, Sophia had her first boyfriend, Alex Chen, but the relationship was anything but healthy. He later recalled that whenever they weren't together, Sophia would call or text him relentlessly. If he didn't reply fast enough, she would show up uninvited, searching for him. At first, he thought it was a sign of how much she cared, but soon it became clear, it was about control. Alex wanted space, but Sophia couldn't bear the thought of him out of her sight. The relationship ended in a messy breakup, but it was only the beginning of a pattern. Despite these issues, Sophia was determined to succeed. She graduated as valedictorian, went on to Stanford University, and pursued a degree in computer science. At Stanford, her intelligence shone through. But so did her obsession with control. Sophia became known for her technical skills, especially in coding and surveillance software. She could use technology to keep tabs on anyone, from her roommates to strangers she met online. Sarah Jennings, her roommate, remembers Sophia casually mentioning things about people that she couldn't possibly know unless she had been snooping through their personal lives. Sarah was uneasy, but she brushed it off. After all, Sophia was brilliant. Still, the invasion of privacy felt unsettling. Sophia's drive to control her environment escalated further after graduation when she landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues admired her for her hard work and dedication. However, her personal life continued to spiral. Her relationships were short, intense, and suffocating. One man she dated in 2019, Jason Tran, described his time with her as emotionally exhausting. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," Jason explained. "If I tried to set boundaries, she would get angry or manipulative. It was draining." By early 2020, Sophia had left the chaos of the startup world behind her and moved to Los Angeles, hoping for a fresh start. She took a remote position with her company, giving her more time to focus on herself. And that's when she met Daniel. The meeting seemed innocent enough, at a local farmers market in Los Angeles on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May. Daniel, a friendly, easygoing guy who loved literature, was picking up fresh produce when he noticed Sophia lingering at the apple stand. Their eyes met, and a casual conversation began. They quickly discovered that they shared a love for classic literature and the outdoors. It was effortless. Daniel was smitten by Sophia's charm, and she was captivated by his warmth and intelligence. Their connection felt natural, easy, and perfect. Soon after, they went on their first hike up to Grizzly Peak. The conversation flowed for hours, with no awkward pauses. Daniel was thrilled. "I've never met anyone so easy to talk to," he told his friend Jim afterward. It seemed like the start of something special. Over the following weeks, their relationship blossomed quickly. They spent evenings in cozy cafes, explored the vibrant city of Los Angeles, and hiked through the surrounding mountains. Daniel felt like he had found someone who understood him, someone who could be both his companion and confidant. But even in these early days of their relationship, there were signs that something wasn't quite right. Sophia began to monopolize Daniel's time. He started to notice how often she would text him, even during the workday. She'd call, insisting on knowing what he was doing, who he was with, and how long he'd be. If he spent time with friends or family without her, she would pout, claiming that she felt left out. At first, Daniel brushed it off, chalking it up to the excitement of a new relationship. But as time went on, the intensity of her behavior became more obvious. Rachel, Daniel's older sister, was the first to voice her concerns. "She seems to want all of your time," she said one evening over dinner. "She's always with you. Have you noticed how you don't see your friends as much anymore?" Daniel laughed it off. "She's just excited. It'll calm down once we're more settled." But Rachel wasn't convinced. There was something about Sophia's need to be involved in every aspect of Daniel's life that didn't sit right with her. Despite his sister's warnings, Daniel continued to fall deeper into his relationship with Sophia. But by the fall of 2020, things had taken a darker turn. Sophia had practically moved in without asking. Daniel's apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a place where he felt watched, restricted, and confined. Sophia began to influence every decision he made, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. She would even veto plans to see his family or friends, making excuses about how she wasn't feeling well or how she needed him home. It was then that Daniel's co-workers started to notice changes in him. He turned down invitations to happy hours and social events, something he had always enjoyed. One colleague, Jim, asked him about it. "What's going on, man? You used to love hanging out with us after work. What changed?" Daniel shrugged it off, telling Jim that Sophia wasn't comfortable with him being out late. But his colleagues began to feel that something wasn't right. By the end of 2020, Daniel's social media presence had practically disappeared. He rarely posted on Facebook or Instagram anymore. His friends and family began to notice the change, but Daniel made excuses. "I'm just trying to be more private," he'd say. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. His life, once full of adventure and connection, was now slipping away into a quiet, controlled world that revolved entirely around Sophia. Sophia's need to control him reached new heights in 2021. She would call him incessantly, even while he was working, just to check in. One evening, she demanded he cancel a long-planned camping trip with friends because she didn't want him to go without her. At that moment, Daniel felt suffocated, trapped in a relationship that, although once filled with promise, was now draining him emotionally. It was at this point that Daniel began to recognize the reality of his situation. The woman he had fallen for, the woman he had trusted, was no longer the person he had met at the farmer's market. She had become someone unrecognizable, someone capable of manipulating him into a life of isolation. And that, he realized, was the beginning of the end. As Daniel started to uncover the depths of Sophia's control over him, he would soon learn just how far she was willing to go to keep him. The lies, the manipulation, and the hidden cameras, each piece of the puzzle was falling into place, revealing a chilling truth he couldn't escape. But in the end, would he be able to break free before it was too late? Daniel Hayes never imagined that the apartment he had once loved would become a place of dread. After months of feeling like he was losing himself in his relationship with Sophia, he had begun to sense that something was wrong. The constant texts, the uninvited visits, the growing isolation from his friends and family, it all started to weigh on him. But it wasn't until the evening he found the hidden cameras that the truth truly hit him. It was a quiet Thursday evening in early October 2021, and Daniel was at home, preparing for a lesson he had to teach the next day. As he moved through the apartment, something caught his eye. He'd always been an organized person, so when he noticed that a book on his shelf was out of place, his curiosity was piqued. He shrugged it off at first, thinking it was nothing. But as he walked through the living room, he noticed something else, a small potted plant, which he was certain he had arranged perfectly just the day before, was slightly moved. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He felt an unease creeping over him, a sensation that he couldn't shake. His mind raced. Maybe he was just overthinking it. Maybe the stress of teaching and everything else had gotten to him. But as he reached for the plant to adjust it back, something small and metallic caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat. A tiny lens, barely the size of a pencil eraser, glinted in the dim light of the room. Daniel's hands trembled as he pulled the object from the soil. It was a hidden camera, expertly disguised in the base of the plant. His mind reeled as he realized that this was no accident. It wasn't just a misplaced book or a minor detail, he had been watched. His privacy, his every move, had been invaded. His heart raced as he scanned the rest of the room. He quickly searched the apartment, his hands shaking as he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras, all placed in everyday objects, a smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. His blood ran cold as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Every conversation, every moment he thought was his own, had been captured on tape. He felt violated, betrayed, and terrified. But the most shocking part was that the person who had done this wasn't some stranger. It was Sophia. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved. She had been watching him, controlling him from the shadows. His mind flashed back to all the times he had felt uncomfortable, when he had noticed her strange behavior, but had dismissed it as nothing more than jealousy or insecurity. Now, it all made sense. With his heart pounding in his chest, Daniel knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this go on any longer. He needed to confront Sophia. The trust that had once existed between them was shattered. This was no longer about love, it was about control, manipulation, and deceit. And he wasn't going to let her control him anymore. Daniel immediately called Rachel, his older sister, his voice trembling as he told her what he had found. "I need to leave. I need to get out of here," he said. Rachel's voice was steady on the other end of the line, but Daniel could hear the concern in her tone. "Come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Daniel couldn't just walk away. His mind raced with a million thoughts. What would he say to Sophia? How could he confront her about this betrayal? But he knew one thing for certain, he couldn't stay in the apartment with her any longer. As he prepared to leave, he heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and there she was, Sophia, standing in the doorway with a smile on her face, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "Hey, babe," she said sweetly, stepping inside. "I brought you some dinner. I thought we could relax tonight." Daniel's heart was racing. His body felt like it was on fire with anger, with fear, with betrayal. He stood there for a moment, frozen, as he looked at her. The woman who had been in his life for so long, the woman he thought he knew, was standing right in front of him, yet everything about her felt foreign. "Sophia," Daniel said, his voice shaky but firm. "I know what you've been doing." Sophia blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to maintain her calm demeanor. "I found them," Daniel continued, his voice rising as the anger bubbled up. "I found the cameras. All over the apartment. You've been watching me. You've been spying on me the whole time. Sophia's eyes widened for a brief moment, but then, to Daniel's horror, a smile crept across her face. It wasn't the smile of someone caught in a lie, it was the smile of someone who had expected to get away with it. You don't understand, she said softly, almost pleading. I was just making sure you would never leave me. I love you, Daniel. I couldn't bear it if you left. Daniel took a step back, his chest tightening. The room felt like it was closing in on him. You can't do this, Sophia. This isn't love. This is control. You've been controlling me, spying on me, and now I don't know who you are anymore. Sophia's expression shifted. She stepped closer to him, reaching out to touch his arm, but Daniel recoiled. Don't, he said, his voice full of resolve. I'm done. Sophia's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of something dangerous in her gaze. She took a step back, her hands trembling at her sides. No, Daniel. You can't leave me. I won't let you. Daniel stood firm, his heart pounding as he realized just how deep the madness had gone. It's over, Sophia. I can't live like this anymore. You need help. In that moment, Sophia's calm facade cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no remorse in them, only fear. She reached out, grabbing Daniel's arm with an iron grip. Please, don't leave me. I'll do anything. Don't you see? You're everything to me. Without you, I'm nothing. But Daniel was resolute. He pulled his arm away from her grip. I'm sorry. But I'm walking away from this. And you need to get help. As he turned and walked out the door, he could hear Sophia's voice behind him, begging, pleading. But Daniel didn't look back. He had made his decision, and no matter how painful, it was the only way forward. The moment Daniel stepped out of the apartment and into the night, he knew that his life was never going to be the same. But as the weight of the situation settled in, he also knew that this was his chance to start fresh. For the first time in a long while, he felt free. Daniel's heart was still racing as he left the apartment. He thought he had finally escaped the suffocating grasp of Sophia, but what he didn't know was that the most dangerous part of this twisted ordeal was yet to come. As he made his way down the hallway, trying to push away the fear and anger, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Sophia, "We need to talk." Daniel's stomach twisted. He had been so sure that confronting her, walking away, would be the end. But now, he felt a strange sense of dread creeping up on him again. He paused for a moment, staring at his phone. "We need to talk." The words echoed in his mind, and suddenly, it didn't seem like something he could just ignore. He wasn't sure if it was the shock from earlier, or the remnants of the connection they once shared, but something made him turn back. With clenched fists, Daniel returned to the apartment, determined to face whatever came next. Little did he know, Sophia wasn't done with him yet. This confrontation would go much further than he had ever imagined. When he arrived at the door, he could hear movement inside. The door was ajar, and the dim light from the apartment flickered like a warning sign. The atmosphere felt heavy, thick with tension. As Daniel stepped in, he was met by silence. It was as though everything had come to a standstill. He called out her name. "Sophia?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. Then, the door clicked shut behind him with a soft, final sound. Sophia emerged from the shadows, her face unreadable, eyes locked onto him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You came back," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but it was clear that something was different. There was no sweetness in her tone now. No pleading. Just coldness. Daniel's mind raced. His heart hammered in his chest as he looked at her, trying to make sense of what was happening. His hands were clammy, but he stood tall, not allowing the fear to show. "Sophia, what is this? What do you want from me? I've already told you, it's over." Sophia took a slow step toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "You think you can just walk away from me, Daniel?" she asked, her voice growing colder, more menacing. "You think you can just leave me like this? After everything I've done for you?" Daniel's mind began to race. He wanted to yell, to scream at her, but his instincts told him to stay calm. Something in Sophia's eyes told him that she was on the edge. There was no reasoning with her anymore. "I didn't want to leave you, Sophia," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "But you crossed a line. You've been spying on me, controlling me. I can't live like that anymore." Sophia's face twisted into a bitter, almost cruel smile. She stepped even closer to him, the space between them closing with every passing second. "You don't understand, Daniel," she said, her words dripping with venom. "I did it for us. For you. To protect us. I was just making sure you'd never leave me." Daniel took a step back. He had heard enough. "This isn't love, Sophia. This is obsession. This is madness." His voice trembled, but the anger was rising now, hotter than ever. "I trusted you. I loved you." Sophia's expression darkened, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't get it. You never did." She took another step closer, eyes wide with desperation, but there was something else in them now, something dangerous. Before Daniel could react, she lunged forward. In her hand was a kitchen knife, gleaming in the dim light. His heart stopped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman who had once been the love of his life, the woman he had tried so hard to save, was now standing in front of him with a weapon in her hand. Time seemed to freeze. Daniel barely had a chance to react before Sophia was right there, the knife raised high, ready to strike. "Please, don't," Daniel said, his voice full of disbelief and fear. "This isn't you." But Sophia was beyond hearing him. She was lost in her rage, in the frenzy of losing control. "You're mine, Daniel," she screamed, her voice wild, full of madness. "You're mine, and you'll never leave me again." Instinct kicked in. Daniel ducked just as the blade came down, narrowly missing his face. He backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. The woman he had loved was standing before him, unrecognizable in her fury. Sophia came at him again, the knife flashing in the low light. This time, Daniel grabbed her wrist, struggling to keep the blade away from him. The force of her attack knocked him off balance, and for a moment, they were locked in a brutal, desperate struggle. "Stop! Sophia, stop!" Daniel yelled, his voice full of panic as he fought to wrest the knife from her hands. But she was stronger than he expected. Her desperation made her relentless, and every time Daniel thought he was gaining control, she would push harder. In the chaos, Daniel managed to twist the knife from her grasp. But as soon as he did, Sophia stepped back, her breath heavy, her eyes wide with fury and disbelief. She collapsed onto the floor, staring at him as if he had betrayed her. I loved you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The tears in her eyes were not of sorrow, but of a twisted sense of loss. "You were supposed to love me forever." Daniel stood there, panting, his chest heaving. His mind was racing, and yet, he could barely process what had just happened. The woman he had trusted, the woman he thought he knew, was now a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had nearly killed him in her madness. As he stood over her, staring at the broken woman on the floor, Daniel realized one painful truth: he had to get out. But it wasn't just about leaving her. It was about saving himself. The silence between them was deafening. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel realized that there was no going back. The love he once felt for Sophia had turned into a dark nightmare, and he was finally free of it. This moment marked the turning point for Daniel. The emotional and physical struggle had finally revealed the truth. Sophia was not the person he thought she was. The twisted obsession, the manipulation, the violence, all of it had come to a head in this terrifying confrontation. And as he walked away from her, Daniel knew that his life would never be the same again. The night was heavy with tension, the air thick with the aftermath of the confrontation. Daniel had barely survived. He had left Sophia behind, broken, defeated, and still clinging to the delusions that had clouded her mind for so long. Yet, despite everything, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hanging in the balance. Something dangerous. The text message he had received earlier from Sophia, the one that had pulled him back into her web, echoed in his mind, "We need to talk." The words were innocent, but Daniel knew better now. He had seen the madness in her eyes. He had felt her desperation, and he couldn't trust her anymore. But he was torn. Part of him still cared, still wanted to help her. However, that part of him was slipping away. The reality of the situation was clear now. There was no coming back from this. But as the hours passed, and the silence between them stretched into a heavy void, Daniel knew he had to make one final decision. He couldn't keep running. He had to face her, confront the person she had become, and put an end to the chaos once and for all. He grabbed his jacket, heart pounding, and headed back to her apartment. He wasn't sure what he would find when he arrived, but he knew that he couldn't leave this part of his life unfinished. Not after everything. As he stood outside her apartment door, Daniel hesitated for just a moment. The familiar hum of the city outside seemed so distant, so insignificant now. Everything he had known, everything he had worked for, had been twisted into something dark, something terrifying. He took a deep breath, his chest tightening with anticipation. He knocked. At first, there was no answer. Just the silence that followed him, pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy weight. Then, the door creaked open slightly, and there she was, Sophia, standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but there was something in her posture, something in the way she looked at him, that chilled him to the bone. "Daniel," her voice was shaky, almost pleading. "I knew you'd come back. I knew you couldn't leave me." Daniel's mind raced. He wanted to turn around, to walk away, but something in her words, in her desperate tone, kept him rooted to the spot. She stepped aside, as if inviting him in, but Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. "Sophia, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living in this nightmare," Daniel said, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and fury. "You don't understand. This isn't love. This is obsession. This is dangerous." Sophia's lips trembled, and she took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I love you, Daniel," she whispered. "I love you more than anything. Please, just listen to me. You have to understand. You're the only person who can make it all stop. You're the only one who can fix this." The words were like poison to Daniel's ears. He had heard them so many times before, but now they felt hollow, empty. The need for control, the manipulation, it all made sense now. Sophia didn't love him. She loved the idea of him, the version of him she had created in her mind. He wasn't her partner. He was her possession. The desperation in her eyes grew more intense. She reached out for him, her hands trembling as they brushed against his chest. "Please, Daniel, you don't know what you've done to me. You've broken me. You're the only one who can make it right." Daniel stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. "I didn't break you, Sophia. You broke yourself. You pushed me to this point. And now I'm done. I can't be a part of this anymore." For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that weighs heavy on your soul, the kind that makes everything feel like it's falling apart. And then, without warning, Sophia's demeanor changed. Her face twisted from sorrow into something darker, something dangerous. The woman who had once been charming, beautiful, and loving, was now a stranger, someone completely unrecognizable. "No, Daniel," she hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. "You can't leave me. You're mine, Daniel. You've always been mine." Before Daniel could react, Sophia lunged at him. Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm with terrifying strength. In the chaos, Daniel stumbled backward, struggling to break free from her grip. But Sophia wasn't letting go. Her fingers tightened around his wrist like a vice. "You will never leave me," she growled, her face inches from his. Her breath was shallow, erratic. "I'll make sure of it." In that moment, everything clicked into place. Daniel realized that Sophia wasn't just losing control, she had lost it entirely. She wasn't the woman he had once known. She was something else, something dangerous, and he was the one standing in the way of her twisted fantasy. Suddenly, Sophia pulled out a small object from her pocket. It was a knife, sharp and gleaming, its blade catching the dim light of the apartment. Daniel's heart dropped into his stomach. He hadn't seen it coming. She had been prepared for this. "You don't get to leave me," she repeated, her voice now wild, frantic. "Not after everything we've been through. You're mine, Daniel. Forever." Daniel's mind was spinning. The terror that gripped him was unlike anything he had ever felt. He had to act fast. With every ounce of strength he had left, he wrenched himself free from her grasp, knocking the knife from her hand in one swift motion. But as he did, Sophia fell back, a look of disbelief spreading across her face. For a moment, everything stopped. Sophia was on the floor, her eyes wide, her breath coming in short gasps. She looked at Daniel as if he were a stranger, an enemy. Her hands were shaking, and for the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of something real in her eyes. Fear. "I never meant for it to get this far," she whispered, the words almost too soft to hear. "But now, I can't let you go." Daniel stepped away from her, his chest tight with fear and adrenaline. "I'm leaving, Sophia. This ends now." But just as he turned to leave, Sophia's voice pierced the silence. "You'll never escape me, Daniel. I'll make sure of it." With those words echoing in his mind, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The nightmare was far from over. As he walked away, heart heavy with grief and fear, he realized that no matter how far he ran, Sophia's obsession would follow him. And soon, he would have to face her once again. This moment marked the true climax of Daniel's struggle, his final confrontation with Sophia, who was no longer just his girlfriend but a woman driven to madness by fear and control. As the night went on, Daniel was forced to confront the terrifying reality that he could never truly escape her. The tension, the danger, and the heartbreak would stay with him forever. Daniel stood at the threshold of the door, his hand trembling as he grasped the handle. The finality of the decision he had made echoed in his mind, but the pain was sharp and raw. His heart ached with the weight of it all. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought he knew, had turned into a stranger before his very eyes. She had crossed every boundary, violated every trust, and in doing so, had irreparably broken something in him. He could hear her voice still ringing in his ears, "You'll never escape me." The words seemed to follow him, haunting him, a constant reminder that even though he was walking away, she wasn't ready to let him go. As he walked out of the apartment, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. Every step he took away from her felt like a battle against his own emotions. How could it have come to this? How had the love he thought was perfect become something so twisted and suffocating? For a moment, Daniel felt guilty, guilty for leaving her behind, guilty for not recognizing the signs sooner. He had always believed he could fix things, but now he realized the truth: he couldn't fix what was broken inside her. He could only save himself. He paused for a moment on the balcony, staring out at the city below. The bright lights of Los Angeles spread out in front of him, but they seemed distant now, like a world he no longer belonged to. His life had been consumed by Sophia for so long, and now, as he stood alone in the quiet of the night, it felt as though he were starting from scratch. The weight of loss, not just of Sophia, but of his own sense of security, his own identity, pressed down on him. He had been so wrapped up in her obsession with him that he had lost sight of who he was. His friends had noticed the change. His sister had begged him to see it. But it took that final moment, that bloody confrontation, for Daniel to truly understand the danger he had been in. The realization hit him like a freight train. But the worst part wasn't the fear he felt in the moment. It wasn't the terror of the knife, or the way Sophia had tried to hold on to him, even at the cost of his life. No, the worst part was the sadness. The overwhelming, aching sadness that now filled his heart as he walked away from her. Because, no matter how much he tried to convince himself, he couldn't forget the woman she had been before. He couldn't forget the love they had shared when everything had seemed so perfect, so full of promise. His heart bled for her, even as he knew he had to walk away. Sophia had never learned how to love herself, and her need for control had become so all-encompassing that it consumed everything around her. She had never given him space to breathe, never given him room to grow. She had bound him to her with invisible chains, believing that was the only way to keep him. And in doing so, she had pushed him so far away that he was no longer the person she thought she knew. As he stepped away from the apartment complex, his thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, anger, and sadness. He felt like he was walking through a fog, disconnected from everything around him. And yet, as he walked down the quiet streets of Los Angeles, a small part of him began to realize something that had been hard to admit: he had made the right decision. His mind flashed back to the earlier days of their relationship, those moments that had seemed so perfect. He remembered laughing with her, feeling that undeniable connection. But now, all those memories were tainted. The love they had shared had been a lie. A lie he had told himself because he was too afraid to face the truth. Sophia's love had never been love at all. It had been an obsession. Daniel's heart was breaking, but it was breaking in the way that something fragile must break before it can begin to heal. And even though the pain was unbearable, he knew he couldn't go back. He had to move forward. As he walked down the street, the city lights glimmering in the distance, Daniel felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't a strong, overwhelming hope, but it was a flicker, a small flame in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild his life, to reclaim the parts of himself that had been lost. He wasn't sure what that future looked like, but he knew that he would never allow himself to be trapped again. As he reached his sister Rachel's apartment, Daniel's phone buzzed. He didn't look at it. He couldn't. The weight of the last few months had been too much for him to process, and he wasn't ready to hear from Sophia. Not yet. He needed space. He needed time to heal. But what about Sophia? That was the question that lingered in the back of his mind. What would happen to her now? Had he done the right thing in leaving? Was there a chance for her to change, to get the help she so desperately needed? Or had he just walked away from a woman who would never be able to fix herself? Daniel didn't have the answers. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. Now, we turn the question to you, the audience. What do you think about Daniel's decision to leave? Was it the right thing to do, or could he have helped Sophia more? What would you have done in his shoes? How do you feel about the ending of their story? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you and get your perspective on this intense and emotional journey.